Welcome back to Ultimate World War II. I've reached a bit of a milestone, part 30. Part 30 already. I estimated at the start of this may go to 70 parts. I'm reckoning that may be about right, okay? So still a long way to go. Still a long way to go. So we ended, okay, in 1942, Africa and Europe. Malta is under constant air attack. The British have launched Operation Crusader, made a lot of gains, but now Rommel has been subjecting the Allied armies in North Africa to counterattacks and been retaking territory. We've had one British armoured brigade walk into a total wipeout, losing most of its armour, and Rommel is now back on the offensive. And as we carry on, okay, it's a similar scenario to what we are doing. Where we have been so far. So, meanwhile, there's an Anglo-Italian agreement, okay, on the exchange of sick and wounded prisoners of war that is announced in early April 1942. Okay, they've agreed to certain conditions, in regard to dealing with injured soldiers, combatants, prisoners. Meanwhile, okay, on the 7th of April, a bit of a noted thing for Malta. The air raid sirens on Malta sound for the 2000th time. Okay, so 7th of April, the air raid sirens on Malta sound for the 2000th time, just showing the constant pressure that Malta has been put under during the war so far, and pressure that will continue for some time. Now, in early April, okay, during the night, a night raid on Essen, okay, RAF Bomber Command drops the first aerial 2-ton bomb ever used. Okay, so a bit of another first for Malta with the 2000th air raid, and then the British dropped the first aerial 2-ton bomb in history. So basically, also another interesting point, okay, is the Indian Congress Party rejects British constitutional proposals. So it's not obviously going to be as plain sailing as what they think. Churchill, meanwhile, mid-April announces that Lord Louis Mountbatten, okay, will be appointed Chief of Combined Operations as of March 18th. So interestingly, okay, Plan Bolero, okay, is also submitted by General Marshall. Plan Bolero is the plan of the Allies to begin planning and preparation for a second front against Germany, to give the Russians a little bit of reprise from all the Nazi attention being there. Plan Bolero is the initial stage of what would eventually become the invasion of Western Europe. Obviously, no details have been discussed, blah, 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 blah. But obviously, kind of precursor to that is Operation Torch to come. Meanwhile, Pierre Laval, okay, forms a new collaborationist government. Okay, so Germany has not entirely been happy with the Vichy government, and they have had issues in that, like North Africa, the Vichy government has not been as easy to deal with as they are in France. Okay, so now a new government is in charge. The Germans are trying to basically create a completely subservient government who will bend to their every will. On 15th of April, President Roosevelt's two envoys, okay, Harry Hopkins and General Marshall, actually returned to Washington from London, taking with them the Bolero plan for opening of a second front in Europe, agreed, but no details having been worked out yet. Also, another key point for Malta, okay, on April 16th. Now, in recognition of the brave heroism they have shown under the constant air battering from Axis air forces, the island of Malta is officially awarded the George Cross by George VI. So Malta is given the highest commendation, what I'm aware of, in the British Army. Meanwhile, okay, Admiral William D. Lee, okay, US Ambassador in Vichy, France, is called home for consultations. So clearly, the Americans are wanting to probably find out a bit more what's going on in Vichy, France. Of course, we have the resistance going on. Pierre Laval's new cabinet is announced, meanwhile, and Pétain remains head of state in France. Obviously, probably more for the prestige, okay. The Germans probably don't want to remove him because he was a hero in France, and therefore having him there as a figurehead is a good thing for the public. Meanwhile, in Malta, okay, 46 Spitfires take off for besieged island from US aircraft carrier Wasp. Okay, a vital reinforcement for defenders at island whose whole hope of survival rests on that aid. Meanwhile, Laval makes a broadcast at French people, the new head of the puppet Vichy government. The policy of understanding and true reconciliation with Germany must be loyalty carried out. It's quite clear what he's there for, to try and bend the French people to Hitler's will. Now, over 3 days from 20th, 22nd of April, Malta, okay, Axis aircraft absolutely bombard Malta ceaselessly and destroy or damage almost all the newly arrived Spitfire reinforcements that were flown in from the Wasp. Most of them are destroyed on the ground, so don't even really take much part in action to shoot down Axis aircraft. Now, it looks as if there's nothing more that Malta can do. Axis forces can now land at will, and there's actually a plan for capture at island, okay, known as Operation C3. The Italian Admiral Vittorio Ter has been nominated to carry it out, and the German General Kurt Student, okay, is to throw in his parachutists. It was Student who led, of course, the capture of Crete. Mussolini's eager to occupy the Maltese islands, but Hitler refuses to give the German forces the go-ahead. To me, they should have gone for Malta if they can land. You know, the island has almost no air defences left. They've been struggling to get supplies through, as I covered on last video, and they're basically hanging on, you know, by the fingernails, and Hitler's refusal to give the order the go-ahead, to me, is a military blunder and not the first or not the last that Hitler will perform. Now, the Luftwaffe, meanwhile, bombs Exeter during night. This is a start of terror raids on historic towns that I mentioned in last video as a reprisal for the growing and larger RAF Bomber Command attacks on German industrial centres. Now, meanwhile, okay, the bad weather in North Africa towards the end of April starts to clear, and air activity is resumed over the whole North African front. Now, meanwhile, Axis formations quickly launch an attack against Tobruk harbour, while British aircraft carry out a night raid on Benghazi. Also, on the night of April 25th, okay, the historic town of Bath is heavily bombed in a night attack by the Luftwaffe. Meanwhile, on Malta, German aircraft hit and silenced a number of anti-aircraft positions in different parts of the island. Now, on April 26th, okay, during an address to the Reichstag, Hitler makes the following statement. He claims that Russian winter has been exceptionally severe, the worst for 140 years, with temperatures as low as minus 50 C. But with coming of spring, he therefore sees new victories for German arms. He demands absolute powers to compel everyone to fulfill his duty, and says, "I will ruthlessly eliminate everybody who does not stand up to the task." But obviously we've been going through the events of the Eastern Front 1942, and of course I have another part of that to do. I will get to in coming episodes, following on from where we left off at Stalingrad. Meanwhile, on 27th of April, Norwich is now bombed, okay, as well. Now, the previous day, Bath is attacked for the second night on the trot, but now the Germans seem to have switched focus and are now bombing Norwich. Now, the following day, April 28th, the Luftwaffe bombs York. Okay, in what is called Baedeker 3-star raids. Now, since the Germans officially claim to use this rating from the famous tourist guide as a way of selecting towns to be attacked, okay, so the Germans are using a UK tourist guide to pick out towns to attack, which is quite comical if you think about high-level German officials ordering some UK tour guides, touring maps. It's quite comical, actually. Meanwhile, Norwich the following day has another heavy overnight bombing attack. Now, meanwhile, Hitler and Mussolini meet at Salzburg, okay? Two allies review the situation, which, although not catastrophic, is hardly rosy, okay? Now, Hitler's obsessed with Eastern Front, and that continues and gets even worse as the war goes on. But he seems quite changed, thoughtful and preoccupied. Yet, as Ciano, okay, Italian foreign minister, emphasises, he's lost none of his verbosity, which he demonstrates in a monologue that lasts 1 hour 40 minutes non-stop. Hitler, if anything, is a talker. So early May, okay, British cruiser Edinburgh, okay, is sunk by a German submarine while escorting a convoy returning from Russia with supplies. And in Mediterranean, British aircraft carry out overnight raids on island of Rhodes and Leros and in Greece, okay, on the Piraeus area and the outskirts of Athens. So basically the RAF, okay, were Malta's constant pressure now starting to lash out themselves. Meanwhile, on 3rd of May, Exeter, the latest of the UK's older cities, is heavily bombed by the Luftwaffe. Now, Hitler often, his ego would not allow him to be outstaged. So the RAF attacks by Bomber Command obviously are going to hurt his ego, and he feels a need to reprise, as he did, if we remember, in the Battle of Britain when Churchill ordered the bombing raid, on Germany at the height of the Battle of Britain, when the RAF was becoming close to exhaustion and close to running out of pilots, and Hitler changed the entire aspect of the Battle of Britain from destroying the RAF so they could invade to scoring almost like a morale victory by doing more damage to our cities than we did to theirs. But therein lies the problem. He fell into a trap, and he's fallen into a trap again now. So North Africa, Axis aircraft bomb Alexandria, okay, concentrating on port and railway installations, and of course Alexandria, a huge port founded, as I mentioned, by Alexander the Great himself. And really, when you look at the whole situation, a lot of it between Germany and Britain, aside from North Africa, is the bombing raids, the air action, and the reprisal air action. And this constitutes a lot of what is going on at this time. Now, basically, on 9th of May, okay, 60 Spitfires, okay, now land on the island. Some again from the US carrier Wasp and the British aircraft carrier Eagle. Now, having learned from previous experience on April 20th, when a large number of those aircraft, as I explained, were destroyed or damaged on ground by a sudden air attack, this time the ground crews quickly fuel the aircraft as soon as they land, and they are ready to take off again within only 35 minutes. Now, this successful operation rekindles the hopes of the besieged islanders. So basically, last time the aircraft were on the ground, they were not refueled, so the British have quickly thought this time, you know what, after last time, we'll land them, we'll get the air crews on them, get them filled, pilots on standby, and they can be ready to launch and won't get caught out again. And it actually proves successful, as it's shown. So a quick adaptation there. Now in Malta, General Albert Kesselring, okay, from Sicily, in his capacity of Commander-in-Chief at Southern Mediterranean Front, reports to Berlin that Malta has been completely neutralised, which is not entirely true. Now, basically, Churchill broadcasts a warning that if the Germans use poison gas in Russia, Britain will retaliate and use poison gas on Germany. This is in reports to some German commanders wanting to deploy poison gas on the Eastern Front to try and gain an edge over the Russians. But Churchill quickly warns them, if you use poison gas in the war, we also will use it against you in retaliatory measures. So over the week, going from 11th of May, okay, Axis aircraft continue to hammer the air and naval bases day after day on Malta, while Axis fighters are engaged in furious dogfights with British Spitfires. Both sides lose many planes. In Eastern Mediterranean, 3 British destroyers, the Lively, the Kipling and the Jackal, are also sunk by the Luftwaffe. So basically, the war goes on now in North Africa, okay, mid-May. The British 8th Army is nearly ready to go over to offensive, okay, but Axis forces show every sign that they will attack first. And really, the summer of 1942 is the prelude to the decisive actions, in North Africa that will change the pattern of the war. Meanwhile, on May 21st, okay, Hitler decides that invasion of Malta, Operation Hercules, put forward by Axis commanders, should be postponed until after the capture of Egypt, okay, for which Axis forces in North Africa are now preparing. Well, it will be easier to prepare than actually to accomplish. Meanwhile, okay, in Malta, Axis air raids continue on Malta is by now completely neutralised as an air and naval base. The constant attacks, not only in the loss of aircraft being supplied to Ireland, but also the constant attacks on the port facilities and the anti-aircraft installations. It's just taking a continual toll. There's no let up. Now, meanwhile, on the 26th of May, okay, the start of the third German counteroffensive in the Western Desert, Rommel resumes the operations broken off when he reached the Gazala line, helped partially by the bad weather coming in, running from Derna to Bir Hakeim. So the German commander-in-chief has 3 German divisions, the 15th and 21st Armoured Division and the 90th Light Division. He's got 2 Italian divisions, okay, the Ariete and the Trieste divisions deployed on right wing. And on left wing, okay, the Gazala sector is General Ludwig Crewell's group. Now, Crewell, a personal friend of Rommel, has under him the Italian 10th and 21st Corps, comprising a number of divisions, and the German 15th Light Infantry Brigade. Now, General Neil Ritchie, okay, General Officer Commanding British 8th Army, has deployed massive his troops against Crewell, convinced that Rommel will attack along the coast so that he can make straight for Tobruk. Now, he has the 13th Corps to the north with the 1st South African Division in the front line with the British 50th Division, flanked by the 2nd South African Division, the 5th Indian Division, the 9th Indian Brigade and the 1st Army Tank Brigade. To the south, okay, the British on the left of the British line, okay, the sector at which Rommel's tanks will be operating, there are 2 armoured divisions, the 1st and the 7th, together with the 201st Guards Brigade, the 3rd Group Indian Motorised Brigade and the 29th Brigade of the 5th Indian Division. Bir Hakeim is held by the 1st Free French Brigade, comprises nearly 6,000 men under General Koenig, who do manage to hold out for a while. Now, Crewell attacks in Gazala sector in early afternoon at 26th of May. General Ritchie congratulates himself, okay, on having seen the enemy's movements precisely and deduced correctly the point at which they would try to break through the British line. But that is a very dangerous strategy to play with Rommel. Rommel plays by subterfuge, okay? And in fact, Crewell's attack is a diversion. The real decisive assault comes in the south, carried out by Rommel's armour. So while the British commander thought he was being very prophetic in picking out the attack, okay, Rommel assumed that would be the case and thus planned around that so he could deliver a punch in the south. At 9 p.m, okay, on 26th of May, Rommel's armoured divisions advance southeastwards across the desert. Okay. Meanwhile, in London, the orders for the 1,000 bomber raid are issued. There is going to be a raid on Africa launched by 1,000 aircraft, which is a terrifying proposition for their target. Meanwhile, on 27th of May, Rommel's tanks are south of Bir Hakeim, okay, with Italian Ariete Division. The other Italian division, the Trieste, moves northeast instead of southeast, though by mistake, and comes up against the British 40th Brigade. The British flanking south has now been successfully turned. The intention now, okay, is to throw in German 90th Light Division against Tobruk to confuse the enemy's lines of communications, while Italian Ariete Division deals with Bir Hakeim. Now, the 2 armoured divisions at Africa Corps, the 15th and 21st, move north, okay, to surround the main body of the British 8th Army. So the subterfuge had succeeded. Okay, Crewell's attack in the north was anticipated by British commander, but it's a diversion. Rommel then attacks in a bit of an off direction to give himself chance to surround large elements of British 8th Army. 6:30 a.m. on 27th of May, Rommel sends in German 21st Armoured Division and the Italian Ariete Division against the positions at 3rd Indian Brigade south of Bir Hakeim, and their troops are actually surprised while having their morning breakfast, okay. They sat eating breakfast for the most part when the German tanks and infantry formations descend on them. Now, meanwhile, German 90th Light Division advances towards Tobruk, forcing position held by British 7th Motorised Brigade at Retma. Now, the British managed to break away and take refuge at Bir El Goubi. The Ariete Division's attack on Bir Hakeim is fought off by the Free French Brigade, and the 2 Panzer Divisions are taken in the flanks by the British 2nd Armoured Brigade from the right and the 1st Army Tank Brigade from the left. Okay, so Rommel's position has now become difficult. Initially, he'd got himself in a position very quickly where he potentially could encircle large parts of 8th Army, but some swift British counterattacks have now put Rommel a bit on the back foot. Rommel's already lost a third of his tanks in these tank engagements and is running short of fuel. He's thus in danger of being halted and cut off in territory controlled by the British. The 90th Light Division, okay, too, is dangerously dangerously overexposed without cover from the armoured divisions, and is also in danger of being surrounded and destroyed. So on the German left in Gazala sector, Axis troops have reached the coastal escarpment and control the Via Balbia, okay, the coast road, which is the only road the enemy can use to retire. So basically, thunderstorms and low cloud towards end of May, okay, force Admiral Air Marshal Harris to postpone the 1,000-bomber raid against one of Germany's most highly industrialised cities. Meanwhile, in Sicily, waves of British bombers, okay, attacked Messina, Catania and Syracuse. And in Czechoslovakia, 2 Czech Patriots, okay, dropped by parachutes from British aircraft, attempt to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich. Shame they didn't succeed. In Prague, the Czechs escape and Himmler's deputy dies of wounds on June 4th. Meanwhile, in France, deportations to Germany of members of resistance movement begin. Now, in North Africa, towards end of May, British 8th Army stops the Italians and Germans from reaching the coast in the rear of the Gazala positions. Now, the Axis forces in North Africa have now opened a gap in minefields defending the British 8th Army positions in central sector and advanced with tanks. Now, despite fierce resistance by British, most of Rommel's tanks, okay, temporarily defensive because they cannot open up a supply line, withdraw southwards under pressure from the tanks of 30th Corps. The Africa Corps is actually running out of fuel. They just have not been supplied properly enough to be able to conduct operations as freely as Rommel would like. Now, Axis forces, meanwhile, attacked British positions, okay, with objective of consolidating the bridge they captured beyond the British minefields, but sadly without success. Now, meanwhile, the RAF is now fully in on the action. They're launching multiple raids. General Ritchie, okay, meanwhile, decides to counterattack the following day on 31st of May. But at request of his commanders in the field, he puts the date back 24 hours. Now, the 1st Armoured Brigade, okay, which has only just arrived in Libya, is detached from other units and sent to plug the gaps in the British line. Now, Rommel gives up the idea, okay, of advancing northwards and goes on defensive, moving all his army into what is now called the Cauldron, okay, an area south of Sidi Mufta and west of Bir El Hamat. Now, this turns the flanks at British minefields, okay. He's expecting British 8th Army to counterattack at any moment, but the attack does not come. Now, the German commander, Ludwig Cruwell, in command of Italian infantry in Gazala area, is actually taken prisoner. And now, finally, after planning, then authorization, then being delayed, okay, the weather conditions over northern Germany show the first signs of improvement, and all preparations for the first 1,000-bomber raid have been made. The aircraft are ready to take off. Their destination is Cologne. So at 10:30 p.m, okay, the operation begins. The first to take off are the Sterlings of 15th Group from airfield at Witten in Huntingdonshire, followed one after another by the rest. Now, bombing of Cologne starts just after midnight, and it is a terrifying experience for the city's inhabitants, hundreds of whom are unable to get out of the cellars. Raging fires, okay, start devastating buildings, the entire city, and a whole of Cologne is enveloped in a cloud of dense arid smoke. Now, over 2,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on the city in this one raid, and the damage caused is absolutely tremendous. 15,000 homes have been destroyed, 6,000 more homes seriously damaged, nearly 50,000 people have been made homeless, there is nearly 500 dead and nearly 5,000 wounded. Now, the British lose 39 bombers, okay, mostly shot down by German night fighters, but Hermann Göring actually writes in his diary about bombing of Cologne, and I quote, "Of course, the effects of aerial warfare are terrible if one looks at individual cases, but we have to accept them." Of course you do, because as you showed in Warsaw, Rotterdam, and the bombing raids on the UK, you've never shied away from launching these kind of terror attacks. So he really does have to accept them. It's a part of war. So meanwhile, end of May, General Neil Ritchie, commanding British 8th Army, is convinced that Rommel's manoeuvre has ground to a halt. Now, he quotes, "Now I've got him in the hollow of my hand." He quotes to General Auchinleck, now Commander-in-Chief at British Armed Forces in Middle East. But Rommel is a long way from being subdued. Now he hurls himself on 150th Brigade at British 50th Division, dug in between two desert tracks, the Kapuza and the El Abd, southwest of Sidi Mufta. Now in the afternoon, the British 30th Corps launches an ineffective counterattack, which is promptly repelled by the Germans. Now at the start of June, the British 150th Brigade, descended on by Rommel, is wiped out. 3,000 men are taken prisoner. The British lose 125 artillery pieces, and the Africa Corps has succeeded in opening a gap for its supply columns. General Ritchie actually quoted, "I'm sorry to have lost the 150th Brigade, but the situation gets better every day." Meanwhile, the RAF, after launching the first 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne, launches raids on Essen and the Ruhr, using a combined 1,036 bombers over two cities, again causing massive damage. And in early June, a first and rather feeble attempt by British 8th Army forces to get into the cauldron fails in face of prompt resistance and reaction by Rommel's forces. So also in early June, after stopping that latest British attack there, Rommel sends the Trieste and 90th Light Divisions, moved some days earlier into Cauldron, to Bir Hakeim, defended by Free French 1st Brigade, who fought very bravely under attack last time and managed to fight off their opponents. The two formations take over from Italian 88th Division, which had been engaged with French Brigade since 26th of May. So Rommel is definitely now putting more pressure on the Free French Brigade. Meanwhile, in East Africa, half a British brigade embarks for Madagascar to relieve the troops garrisoning the island. And on Malta, the raids on the island, generally and particularly on Mikaba airfield, continue without respite. Meanwhile, on Sardinia, British air raids on Cagliari and Sant Antioco Island are conducted. So the RAF, even though they're launching raids on Germany and Europe, they're fighting in North Africa, they are not really taking pressure either off bombing targets in Greece, Sicily and southern Italy by any means. In North Africa, 8th Army counterattacks at nightfall to reduce the salient made by Axis forces in central sector of the British line. Now, during the night, the German 15th Army Division digs in at Bir El Hamat, driving off British counterattacks. Now, the British counterattack, codenamed Aberdeen, is unsuccessful. The Axis salient is not reduced, and the British lose 2 infantry brigades and 4 artillery regiments. There's been a lack of coordination between units, and the Germans have put up a murderous barrage. Now, Rommel launches a counterattack in afternoon, sending his reserve tanks eastwards. By sunset, every British unit trying to get back into the cauldron has been driven back. The 8th Army has lost some 6,000 casualties. Rommel, meanwhile, announces he's taken 4,000 prisoners and captured or destroyed 160 tanks. Meanwhile, the United States, declares war on Bulgaria, Romania and Hungary. So following on from his success in the Cauldron, Rommel sends the 15th Panzer Division to Bir Hakeim to aid the Trieste and the 90th Light Divisions, which have been unable to make any headway against a stiff resistance at Free French Brigade under General Marie-Pierre Koenig. So German and Italian troops concentrate on the area called Knightsbridge and threaten Tobruk. Meanwhile, in Malta, Axis bombers pound the island's military installations. Both islands' airfields are damaged, and both sides report numerous planes lost. Now, during the night also, British aircraft carry out another heavy air raid on Messina, causing severe damage to installations there. Meanwhile, in North Africa, the brave Free French 1st Brigade, now under intense pressure with German and Italian reinforcements sent to that sector, are bitterly holding out and refusing to go down. By 8th of June, the battle in Knightsbridge, Bir Hakeim area could still go either way. Free French are defending Bir Hakeim bravely, but they've had to now start slowly giving up ground, and their supply position is becoming precarious. Now, the following day, June 9th, the British do make an unsuccessful attempt to bring help to the Free French surrounded at Bir Hakeim, where the fighting is still extremely bitter. Meanwhile, in Italy, British aircraft bomb Taranto, causing severe damage. So the British are not letting the Italians off the hook at all. June 10th, okay, assault groups of the Africa Corps, okay, break into the area of Bir Hakeim. Now, during night, French survivors escape across German lines, leaving their wounded behind them. They do manage to succeed in rejoining Allied forces. British lavish praise on French general whose courageous defence had forced Rommel to delay his final attack on Tobruk for a number of weeks, but it is still Rommel who's won the day and achieved victory, albeit taking longer than what Rommel hoped. So by 11th of June, okay, Axis forces take Bir Hakeim and they capture 100 French soldiers, many of them wounded who could not get out in time. Meanwhile, on Malta, double operations Harpoon and Vigorous to get supplies through to Malta have begun. And meanwhile, okay, also in approaching mid-June, okay, is the conclusion of a new mutual assistance pact with Russians announced in London and Washington. Under it, the Russians will be able to repay in kind the loans made to them under the Lend-Lease Act. Meanwhile, on 12th of June, North Africa, tank battles continue in area of El Adem and Knightsbridge. The Germans are now within 15 miles of Tobruk itself. Now in Romania, the Ploiești oil fields, okay, are bombed by American aircraft from bases in Egypt. On the way home, several B-24s have to make emergency landings in Turkey, and with Turkey declaring neutrality, their crews are interned. On June 13th, okay, Axis armour inflicts a heavy defeat on British, forcing them to withdraw from El Adem and Knightsbridge, so supply lines of 13th Corps are threatened. The force defending Knightsbridge falls back on Acroma. General Ritchie, meanwhile, orders the most advanced divisions at 13th Corps, the South African 1st and the British 50th Division to fall back with the loss of El Adem. And so many tasks, their position have become too exposed, basically. Two divisions retire on Egyptian frontier, the first along the coast road, the second inland. Now, the Germans and Italians attack towards Acroma, but make little progress in spite of their numerical superiority of their armour. Now, General Auchinleck, okay, states, I have made it clear to you that Tobruk must not be invested. I realise that its garrison may be isolated for short periods until our winter offensive can be launched. It may be that General Headquarters at Cairo do not know true positions at 8th Army, though in my mind. General Auchinleck, okay, tells Churchill that General Ritchie, foresees the possibility that British may have to withdraw to the old frontier, the Egyptian border, of course, which will be the site of one of the great battles of World War II in North Africa to come. Meanwhile, in Gazala sector, okay, the Axis forces have bypassed Acroma and the via Balbia and reached the coast west of the Tobruk perimeter. And Rommel, meanwhile, mid-June reports that he has won the battle against the British 8th Army. It only remains to take Tobruk. The 29th Division at 5th Indian Division, 29th Brigade, at 5th Indian Division, drives off attacks by Germans and Italian troops with tank and air support in the area of El Adem. Major General Klopner, okay, 2nd South African Division, is given the command of the Tobruk fortress with the task of defending it to the last man. And meanwhile, okay, in the Mediterranean, an air and naval battle takes place off Pantalaria. Now, the Italians lose the cruiser Trento, the British lose 1 cruiser, 3 destroyers and 6 merchant ships, part of a convoy bound for the fierce attack at Malta. Meanwhile, in North Africa, British send 4 infantry brigades, okay, with artillery and armoured units to man the Tobruk fortress. Now, rest of British 8th Army continues its action against the heavy Axis pressure. Now, a German-Italian armoured column makes for Sidi Rezaiq, okay, and creates a diversion against El Adem. British troops withdraw from El Adem during the night. Now, evidently reassured, okay, by General Auchinleck's optimistic dispatch, Churchill leaves for Washington to review the military situation on the various fronts with President Roosevelt. But meanwhile, the following day, Axis forces move on Coast Road and secure control of the road to Bardia. Okay, so now officially Tobruk is cut off. And the following day, Axis troops occupy the area of Gambut, which is located outside the Tobruk perimeter, site of the landing strips that should have been being used for supplying the fortress, but now it's under Axis control. Thus Rommel completes his manoeuvre to fully surround the Tobruk fortress and perimeter. Meanwhile, General Spaatz takes command of the US 8th Air Force stationed in Britain. So there's moves and counter moves. Okay, Rommel's had a vast success following on from Operation Crusader. Rommel's counterattacks, he's holding the British attacks, formation of defensive lines from which he'll springboard have really paid off, and Rommel is pretty much driving the British all the way back to the Egyptian border. Now, on June 19th, okay, the British withdraw beyond Bardia on the Libyan-Egyptian frontier, and there the British will really dig in, and try to hold off the Axis forces. So beginning of June, okay, let's look at the Battle of Pantalaria. Okay, six steamers sail from Gibraltar in evening, escorted by 10 destroyers, and watched from a distance by the battleship Malaya, the aircraft carriers Eagle and Argus, 4 cruisers, 17 destroyers, a mine layer, 2 corvettes, 6 motor gunboats, and 10 minesweepers. Now, at the same time, 11 steamers leave Alexandria, escorted by Admiral Sir Henry Harwood's Mediterranean fleet, the former battleship Centurion, which is now a transport ship, a whole number including 26 destroyers, 18 submarines, 7 cruisers. Now, the British movements do not escape. Italian intelligence and naval command prepares to prevent the 2 convoys from reaching Malta. So under Admiral De Zara are the cruisers Eugenio de Sivio and others, and they leave Palermo in company of 5 destroyers and 14 submarines to intercept the Gibraltar convoy. Now, against the Alexandria convoy, a force under Admiral Angelo Iacchino sails from Taranto with the battleships Littorio, Vittorio Veneto, the cruisers Garibaldi, Duce di Aosta, Gorizia, Trento, and 12 destroyers. So the Italians are putting a lot of ships into this operation to stop those Maltese convoys. On June 14th, the Harpoon convoy is attacked by a number of Italian aircraft, which seriously damaged the cruiser Liverpool and sink the steamship Tamibar. Now, in the evening, okay, the British ships now at entrance at Strait of Sicily are left by their escort, which returns to base, and only the destroyers and the cruiser Cairo stay with the convoy. Now, the British regard this as a sufficient escort because they're certain that in these waters the Italians only operate with coastal motorboats, whereas in fact Admiral De Zara's squadron is bearing down on them. So rather than just having motor torpedo boats, actually a main Italian armada, including cruisers, destroyers and battleships, is bearing down on them. So that is a complete misstep by the British commander there. At 5:39 a.m. on June 15th, 2 formations make contact off Pantalaria. Now, the engagement lasts 10 hours, okay? The British cruiser Cairo is hitting the bows, and the destroyers Bedouin and Partridge are hit several times and immobilised. Meanwhile, Axis aircraft sink the steamer Chant, severely damage the Budouan, and start a major fire on board the tanker Kentucky. Those last 2 ships are later sunk by German aircraft. So of the 6 merchantmen, okay, that left Gibraltar, there are only 2 left. Okay, still the Axis air attacks continue, and the Bedouin is sunk, while 5 destroyers and the Harare are driven onto a minefield. They're not seriously damaged, except for 1 ship which sinks. The 2 remaining ships succeed in reaching Malta, but at a high price to the British, okay, for those final 2 ships to reach Malta. 2 destroyers, 4 steamers, are sunk, 5 destroyers, 2 cruisers and 1 steamer are damaged. Okay, so they've lost 2 destroyers sunk, 5 destroyers damaged, 2 cruisers damaged. They've lost 5 steamers, and basically only 1 Italian destroyer, the Vivaldi, is severely damaged, and slight damage to 2 Italian cruisers. So it is actually a major victory for the Italian forces. At dawn on the same day, Admiral Iacchino's squadron is attacked by a group of torpedo aircraft south of Crete. Now, they hit and immobilise the cruiser Trento, and at about 10 a.m. in the morning, while she's been taken in tow by 1 or 2 escorting destroyers, she's hit directly by 2 torpedoes from a submarine and sinks. Of the 1,151 men on board, only 602 are picked up. Now, British torpedo aircraft attack Italian squadron all day without a moment's pause, and they are joined by formations of American 4-engine Liberator bombers. The battleship Littorio is hit, but not seriously, but the British naval formations under Admiral Vian return to Alexandria. Now, in view of presence of Iacchino's squadron, the British Admiral has very wisely cancelled the operation. On the way back to Alexandria, okay, the British squadron is repeatedly attacked by Axis aircraft, which sink the destroyer Airedale and hit the disguised battleship battleship Centurion and another destroyer, the Nestor, which sinks during the night. At 8 p.m, okay, on night of June 15th, German submarine U-205 sinks the cruiser Hermione, okay. So ends Operation Vigorous, okay, a complete failure in view not only at losses suffered by escort, but the fact that not one of British steamers reached its destination, okay. Thus the British have little to show for their operation, but they've lost a lot of ships sunk and damaged. The Italians and Germans can be well satisfied with the way the Battle of Pantalaria turned out. So with that, okay, I will leave. Okay, World War II, Africa and Europe Part 2. Coming in Part 3, right from the off, is the massive attack undertaken by General Erwin Rommel to finally seize the fortress of Tobruk. We will be back in Axis and Allies Europe 1942 Part 3 to take a closer look at the taking of Tobruk and Rommel's assault. So there is Part 30 on my journey. Still much more to do, but I am out for now.